Listen carefully. There was a woman so feared that men refused to stand near her, yet powerful enough to end a dynasty with a whisper. Her name was erased, her story buried, and what she learned was never meant to survive. If you hear this, you will never look at power the same way again. What you are about to enter is not a story meant to entertain you. It is a descent into a kind of knowledge institutions depend on you never recognizing. Because once you see how control actually works, how fear is engineered, how hierarchy is enforced, how weakness is disguised as order, you cannot unsee it. And this story is not ancient in the way myths are ancient. It is recent. It is American. And its fingerprints are still on you. In the mid-19th century, plantations were not merely agricultural operations. They were laboratories of psychological domination. Every bell, every ledger entry, every sermon preached on Sunday morning was part of a system designed to condition obedience and reward silence. Men like to imagine the masters as brutes and the enslaved as broken. That fiction is comforting. Reality is more dangerous. Because the system did not survive through cruelty alone. It survived through intelligence. Through selective mercy. Through information asymmetry. Through people who learned how to move unseen. Among thousands of preserved records in rural Georgia, there exists one ledger that unsettled archivists for decades. Not because it documented violence that was routine, but because it documented inversion. A reversal so complete it threatened the mythology holding the entire order together. A woman purchased for the price of a mule. A woman described as abominable. A woman whose very appearance violated the visual code that told everyone their place. She arrived marked, not by chains alone, but by a condition that confused the eye and disrupted the rules of recognition. In a society obsessed with classification, she could not be easily categorized. That made her dangerous. Not because she was violent. Because she was ambiguous. And ambiguity is poison to rigid systems. This is where men fail to understand power. They look for force. She understood leverage. She understood that institutions rot from within, not from attack, but from compliance weaponized. She watched. She learned. She waited. While others were broken by the machine, she mapped it. What happened next was recorded in neat handwriting, balanced columns, and sealed reports. And when the truth finally surfaced, officials realized too late that what they were investigating was not a crime of passion or madness but a successful takeover. You are not here by accident. Stories like this were not meant to be told aloud. But now that you're listening, you are already inside the gate. Sarah learned quickly that fear was a language, and like any language, it could be spoken fluently or poorly. Most shouted it. She whispered. The plantation believed her powerlessness was permanent, encoded in law, reinforced by ritual, justified by scripture. What they did not understand was that systems this rigid depend on predictability. And Sarah was an anomaly they could not predict. Her appearance isolated her, but isolation granted her something rare: privacy. While others were watched, corrected, punished, she was avoided. Overseers looked past her. Field hands stepped away. Even cruelty requires proximity, and no one wanted to be close to what unsettled them. So she moved through spaces unnoticed, absorbing patterns others never questioned. Who spoke to whom? Which numbers mattered? Which rules bent quietly when no one was looking? She was placed in the kitchen house, the informational heart of the estate. Food is power. Inventory is power. Timing is power. The kitchen fed the house, the overseers, the guests, the rituals. Sarah learned how abundance was staged and scarcity manufactured. She learned how generosity appeared effortless when suffering was hidden elsewhere. She learned that ledgers mattered more than whips. The master prided himself on records. He believed documentation equaled control. But documentation also reveals habits. Sarah memorized his rhythms. When he checked numbers. When he grew careless. When grief softened his vigilance. Widowed men often mistake order for healing. He was no exception. she began correcting errors before they were noticed. Quietly. Efficiently. She made herself useful without ever appearing ambitious. This is critical. Ambition triggers defense. Competence, when framed as service, triggers reliance. And reliance is the first crack in authority. Soon, decisions passed through her hands without her name attached. Quantities adjusted. Deliveries timed. Small efficiencies introduced that made the plantation more profitable. The master believed this confirmed his own brilliance. That is the oldest weakness of men who rule systems. They assume improvement proves their superiority, but what Sarah was building was not efficiency. It was dependency. When the machine began to rely on her corrections, removing her became unthinkable. And when she understood that, she stopped being afraid. This is how power actually shifts. Not with rebellion, but with indispensability. Once dependency is established, perception must be managed. Sarah understood that fear alone would never elevate her. Fear isolates. Respect integrates. She needed the system to rationalize her presence, not question it. So she became invisible where it mattered, exceptional where it benefited others. She spoke little. When she did, it was precise. She never contradicted openly. She framed insight as clarification. Men do not resist help when it flatters their authority. She never demanded access. She waited to be invited, knowing invitations feel voluntary even when engineered. The housekeeper noticed first. Then the overseer. Then the master himself. Sarah was summoned not as a threat, but as a convenience. Her condition, once a reason for avoidance, became irrelevant. Familiarity dulls superstition. Repetition normalizes the abnormal. This is how institutions absorb what they once rejected. Meanwhile, Sarah listened. Conversations in the house revealed debts, rivalries, and insecurities. The neighboring planters' envy. The county officials' corruption. The preacher's private doubts. She learned which men drank too much, which feared scandal, which could be pressured quietly. Information is leverage only if you know when to apply it. Sarah waited years. She watched alliances shift, harvests fluctuate. Reputations wobble. She understood that collapse does not come from a single blow, but from cumulative imbalance. Then the master fell ill. Not dramatically. Gradually. Fatigue. Confusion. Mistakes in his own ledgers. He trusted Sarah to correct them. He trusted her judgment when his failed him. And when decisions bore fruit, he trusted her more. What no one questioned was why the plantation prospered even as others declined. Why disputes resolved themselves. Why inspections found everything in order. Officials prefer stability to truth. Stability keeps their own position secure. By the time whispers began, Sarah was already woven into every process. Removing her would unravel the machine. And men who benefit from a system will defend it, even when it contradicts their beliefs. This is the quiet genius of control. Make yourself necessary, then let others justify your existence for you. The transformation reached its irreversible point when Sarah stopped reacting and began directing. Not overtly. Strategically. She understood that authority is not declared, it is deferred to. And men defer when uncertainty exceeds confidence. The master's illness worsened. Decisions were delayed. Accounts grew complex. Legal matters required attention. Sarah handled correspondence. She advised which debts to settle, which to defer. Each choice tightened her grip. The plantation no longer ran despite her, it ran because of her. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because what Sarah did next forces a reckoning with morality itself. She did not overthrow the system. She mastered it. She used its rules against its architects. And when the master died quietly, without spectacle, the estate passed not through blood, but through obligation. Legal documents bore her calculations. Witnesses testified to her indispensability. Officials reviewed records that made sense only because she had structured them that way. The conclusion was unavoidable. Ownership transferred. Control consolidated. A woman once deemed abominable now commanded the estate. Pause here. If you are still listening, you already feel it. This moment is where men either look away or step forward. If you understand what this represents, prove it. Comment the phrase "I see the pattern" twice. Not once. Twice. This is not for me. It is for you, because recognition is the first act of self-mastery. And once you recognize how power moves, you cannot return to ignorance. Sarah did not win through violence. She won through patience, precision, and an understanding of human weakness. Institutions fear disruption, but they reward competence. She became the embodiment of order in a decaying system. And that is why her story was sealed. Not because it was shameful. Because it was instructional. After the transfer, investigators searched for scandal. They expected passion, manipulation, madness. What they found instead was compliance. Signed papers. Balanced books. Testimony from men who benefited too much to protest. The system had validated its own inversion. Sarah ruled quietly. No proclamations. No vengeance. She retained overseers, honored contracts, maintained productivity. Stability continued. And that terrified them more than rebellion ever could have. Because rebellion confirms authority. Success without resistance undermines it. Records show she altered working conditions subtly. Not out of mercy alone, but efficiency. Fear exhausts labor. Stability sustains it. She understood that suffering was a cost, not a virtue. This was not compassion. It was optimization. The myth of the abominable woman became a cautionary whisper. Officials labeled her an anomaly. An exception. Anything to avoid confronting the truth that the system itself had enabled her rise. That intelligence, once ignored, had outperformed brutality. Eventually, her name faded. The estate was sold. Documents sealed. The lesson buried. Because men in power do not fear cruelty being exposed. They fear competence emerging from the margins. This is why stories like this resurface now. Not as history, but as warning. The structures that governed that plantation never vanished. They evolved. They refined. They learned, and so should you. Understand this: power is not granted. It is assumed when others depend on you. The most dangerous individuals are not those who rage against the system, but those who learn it better than its masters. Sarah did not break the rules. She perfected them, and once you see that, you will never confuse authority with strength again. What followed Sarah's rise was not chaos, but silence. And silence is the most revealing aftermath of power shifts. The county did not celebrate. The churches did not preach sermons about it. The neighboring planters did not speak her name in public. They continued their routines as if nothing fundamental had changed, because acknowledging it would require admitting a fatal flaw in the architecture they lived inside. This is how institutional denial operates. When reality contradicts ideology, reality is quarantined. Records are sealed. Conversations are redirected. The anomaly is framed as unrepeatable. But systems do not produce accidents. They produce outcomes. Sarah's existence exposed an uncomfortable truth: control was never rooted in moral authority. It was rooted in administration. In logistics. In information. In the quiet hands that touched everything but owned nothing until they did. The plantation had always been governed by unseen labor. Sarah merely made that visibility unavoidable. Men who studied the case privately understood this. Letters between officials reveal a shared anxiety, not about race or gender, but about precedent. If one person could learn the machine well enough to inherit it, others could too. That realization threatened more than plantations. It threatened banks, courts, and churches built on the same assumptions. So the narrative was reshaped. She became a curiosity. A grotesque tale. An abomination elevated by chance. The focus remained on her appearance, her body, her supposed strangeness. Anything to avoid discussing her competence. This is deliberate misdirection. When power feels threatened, it distracts with spectacle. Sarah herself withdrew from public view. She understood exposure invites correction. She delegated. She documented. She ensured continuity without dependence on her presence. That is the final evolution of control, systems that persist even when the architect disappears. This is where the story stops being historical and becomes instructional. Because nothing Sarah exploited has vanished. You live inside versions of the same machinery, corporate, bureaucratic, digital. The rituals have changed. The logic has not. Those who scream against the system are managed. Those who ignore it are consumed. Those who study it patiently are elevated, and the system will never thank them. It will erase them. Ask yourself why this story unsettles you. It is not because of cruelty. You already know cruelty exists. It is because it reveals how fragile hierarchies actually are. How much they rely on belief rather than force. How easily belief can be redirected. The final record of Sarah is not a death notice or a confession. It is an absence. A series of transactions completed without incident. A plantation transferred without bloodshed. A system continuing as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. That is the signature of a successful operation. Dangerous knowledge does not announce itself. It integrates. It normalizes. And then it disappears, leaving only outcomes that seem inevitable in hindsight. You were never meant to hear this story framed this way. You were meant to hear it as folklore, as horror, as aberration. Because if you recognize it as a blueprint, it challenges everything you have been taught about strength, rebellion, and success. This is not an invitation to cruelty. It is a warning about naivety. The world is not governed by the loudest voices or the strongest fists. It is governed by those who understand structure and patience. Sarah's story survives because systems cannot fully erase their own contradictions. Somewhere, a ledger remained. Somewhere, a sealed report leaked. And now it has reached you. What you do with it determines whether this was entertainment or initiation. Understand this clearly. Mastery begins when you stop asking for permission, stop demanding recognition, and start making yourself indispensable where it matters. That is not corruption. That is literacy and power. The men who built the plantation believed they were untouchable. They were not. They believed their rules protected them. They did not. Their greatest vulnerability was the belief that those beneath them could never understand the game. Do not make that mistake in your own life. This knowledge will not make you comfortable. It will make you precise. And once precision replaces illusion, you cannot return to sleep. The descent ends here. What comes next is application.